Hello. Welcome to You and Your Brain. Can you prevent Alzheimer's? I'm Sarah Smith, the editor-in-chief of Prevention Magazine, which is hosting this event with Healthy Women, an organization dedicated to health and wellness education, and the Women's Alzheimer's Movement at Cleveland Clinic, a leader in the work around Alzheimer's prevention. I am honored to introduce award-winning journalist Joan Lunden, who is going to moderate what promises to be a fascinating conversation. Joan spent 2 decades on Good Morning America, of course, and she is an ardent health and senior advocate who I know cares a great deal about this topic. She hosts Second Opinion with Joan Lunden on PBS and is the author of the terrific book, Why Did I Come Into This Room? A Candid Conversation About Aging. Joan, thank you for being here today to guide us as we all learn more about prevention and Alzheimer's.
Thank you, Sarah, for always inviting me to be a part of these. They are always fascinating. Hi, everyone. I am Joan Lunden, and I am so eager to talk about this subject. I think everybody worries about losing their cognitive abilities. And today's program is, Can You Prevent Alzheimer's? So today's conversation is sponsored by Prevention Magazine, Healthy Women, and the Women's Alzheimer's Movement at Cleveland Clinic. And that's otherwise known as WHAM, and that's how we'll refer to it throughout the discussion today. And that is a nonprofit organization founded by Maria Shriver. And WHAM, which helps fund women-focused Alzheimer's research, was the first to report publicly, it was in 2010, that women make up 2 out of 3 cases of Alzheimer's and 2 out of 3 caregivers. And that just proves that Alzheimer's is absolutely a huge women's issue. Now, thanks to WHAM, I'm going to be joined today by people whose work and insights are truly going to help us understand what we know today about Alzheimer's and about preventing the disease so that we can all try to protect our futures. Our panelists today are Dr. Heather Snyder, Vice President of Medical and Scientific Relations at the Alzheimer's Association. She oversees initiatives that accelerate innovative research in this field. And Dr. Jessica Caldwell, I'm not sure she's quite up online yet, but we're getting her, the director of the Women's Alzheimer's Movement Prevention Center at Cleveland Clinic, where she is doing some really groundbreaking work on Alzheimer's. And also with us today, we're pleased to have Crystal Allen. She is a news anchor in Las Vegas who has a family history of Alzheimer's. And so she is a patient of the WHAM Prevention Center, making her a very important part of Dr. Caldwell's work. And we brought this smart and passionate group of women together today because during and after our previous You and Your Brain webinars, a lot of you wrote to us and you asked all kinds of great questions. And we are going to be tackling those questions today about whether there really is anything that we can do to try to prevent this from happening to us and also the people that we love, because it is a devastating disease. And, you know, many of us have a lot of fear. I mean, I bet you when it comes to the idea of aging, this is probably the top fear about Alzheimer's as well as dementia. And I mean, it's important to me. I'm 72 years old. And I know it's important to prevention and to healthy women and WHAM to talk about the fears that we have and also about, you know, the support that the work that's being done, the research that is being done, that is really, I think, changing the face of Alzheimer's. Because the great news is there really is a great deal of promising science now that we can really look to, and also a lot of practical advice that we can give you today about preventing Alzheimer's and dementia. So thank you, our audience, because you really inspired today's event. So let's get started. And I think I see Dr. Caldwell is with us now, right? Yes, all right. So I want to start with you, Dr. Caldwell, because I want to know where we are in kind of the world of Alzheimer's knowledge. And I'm going to ask you to start with that really basic question, because I don't know if everybody always understands the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's. So what is it And why are women more at risk? Well, we got to get her to turn her mic on.
All right.
There you
Can
go.
you hear me okay?
Yeah,
All
do the basics of what is this?
Thank you. I do get that question all of the time in my clinic. So when you hear the word dementia, the important thing to know is that is an umbrella term. So dementia covers many, many different types of conditions. You can get dementia from a lot of different things. The most common way to get dementia is by having Alzheimer's disease. So Alzheimer's disease causes dementia. And all dementia means is that your thinking has changed to the point where you need help day to day doing things like managing your finances or your medications. When it comes to why women are more at risk, it's a tough question, and we still don't have all of the answers. One of the reasons, and the one that people thought explained everything for quite some time, is that on average, women live longer than men. And the number one risk for getting Alzheimer's disease is just aging.
Yeah.
But now we know that there are many other factors that play into women's risk, everything from potentially menopause to how much we exercise, and even our genetics give us a different risk profile.
I just want to back up for just a minute about something you just said, because you can have dementia without having Alzheimer's, correct? Yeah. And that's what I think so many people are just so fearful of, just that gradual loss of cognitive ability and the ability to call up memories and remember whether you had lunch 20 minutes ago.
Absolutely.
So you can have, so dementia is kind of the broad loss of cognitive ability, and Alzheimer's is a very specific loss, correct?
Correct. So someone could get dementia from having, for example, a terrible stroke or even a terrible head injury, but Alzheimer's disease causes a particular type of dementia, and it just happens to be the most common way to get dementia.
Dr. Snyder, there's going to be people out there that says, come on, like, why is it even worth talking about prevention? This is not just a terrifying disease. This is a terminal disease. So tell us why they should have hope.
Absolutely. And I would say, I think this is an incredibly exciting time in this space. You referenced, Joan, the science, and the science is evolving and emerging as we're thinking about prevention. When we talk about heart disease, we talk now about a heart attack or stroke that people are able to often go through either when they have some of the initial changes of heart disease, they're able to intervene with lifestyle or medication and change their risk of a later life heart attack or stroke. Or even once they've experienced a heart attack or stroke, have interventions that have helped them have the best quality of life that they can. So when we're thinking about our brain, the opportunity for us to, in that same kind of idea, Alzheimer's is a continuum. Their underlying biology is changing decades before our memories change. We can intervene in that biology and change that trajectory. The idea that lifestyle interventions, behavioral modifications, medicines, combining those together across that entire continuum, it's very much how we think about heart disease today. And it's that kind of intervention. It's that kind of idea of prevention. That's exactly where we have to be focusing. Because if we don't intervene, we're going to double the number of people that are living with this disease.
So many, many questions from everything you just said, all really wonderful questions. But I just want to ask, I want to start with the basic genetics. Do most people who get diagnosed have a family history? Because I think that's what most people think.
Yeah, so when we talk about the genetics, there's actually, there's a very, very small percentage of individuals, less than 1% of people around the world, that if their parent or their sibling had the disease, they are likely to inherit, or they have a 50% chance of inheriting. That's what we call familial Alzheimer's, very rare, typically a much younger age of onset as well, so 30s, 40s, and 50s. For 99% of it, what we talk about when we talk about genetics is risk genes, meaning, and there's about 100 different variations of our genes that have been associated with increased risk or decreased risk as well. So we're seeing more that there is a linkage. If you have a family history, you're at an increased risk, but it by no means guarantees it. And in fact, many people that develop Alzheimer's or are diagnosed with Alzheimer's have no family history.
So I want to bring Crystal in. Hi, Crystal.
Hi there, Joan.
What is it like for you? You have this family history. So what is it like for you to know that?
Well, I think there is power in knowing. So, starting with that. So, I think it is important to know so that you can take some of those preventative steps because, like the research has shown, as many as 40% of the cases, if you are able to make those healthy lifestyle adjustments, it can be prevented. So, I think there's power in knowing. That's first of all. So it is good to know, but on the other hand, it's kind of a double-sided coin, right? Because it's concerning. You're fearful when you've seen, in my case, both sides of your family dealing with this. Very personally, on my mom's side, it was my aunt who had dementia and my grandfather who had Alzheimer's, and on my dad's side, it was my grandmother who had Alzheimer's. Her brother had Alzheimer's, and her father had Alzheimer's. So when you're seeing it so pervasive throughout your family, it is cause for concern. But at the same time, you know that if you can take these steps, you could possibly change the trajectory not only of your health, but of your family's health and create some generational shifts there. So that's the good part. If there is the good part about knowing.
Yeah, I know it's got to weigh heavy, and we're going to get into talking about what some of those lifestyle changes are. I just want to make sure, Dr. Caldwell, you just alluded to it, but I want to make sure that it's asked specifically so that people hear it. Even if there is no family history of Alzheimer's, just like you don't have to get it if there is, if you have no family history of Alzheimer's, that's not a guarantee that you won't get it, right?
That's true. If you have no family history, as you age, your risk still does increase.
All right. And are there tests available to detect this disease? I don't know if it's detecting genes or breakdowns in your body of some kind, but are there tests?
Sure. As Dr. Snyder mentioned, there are some genetic tests, and some of those tests detect cause genes for those early onset kinds of Alzheimer's. Some are detecting risk genes. So even if someone has a family history, oftentimes it's not recommended to get a genetic test because it may not give you a treatable information you can act on. There are other types of tests in research settings that are under development for detecting Alzheimer's disease proteins earlier and earlier, whether that's through blood or through brain imaging. But again, most of those would be used if your doctor was trying to figure out which type of dementia you had.
I assume that's kind of the goal of a lot of this research. You know, as people live longer and longer and longer, this is going to become an even more worrisome problem unless we crack this nut and figure out how we can get in there and intervene. Are you hopeful that we're going to find tests that are going to be able to detect it even earlier so we can try our best to prevent it?
I am. I'm hopeful that in the coming years we will see tests that can detect the disease before it's really in clinical stages, before people start having memory problems. But I also think we need to think even more broadly about risk profiles. Who's most likely to get this disease and who's most likely to benefit from intervening on it? And so can we act on those things even if some of these other tests don't pick things up until later?
And boy, oh boy, that takes us to prevention, which is a word that, you know, in the past you wouldn't even think about talking about prevention when you're talking about Alzheimer's. But Dr. Snyder, I mean, prevention's really a new concept in this fight against Alzheimer's. So what's the latest research telling us about why at least some Alzheimer's might actually be preventable?
Yeah, absolutely. So Crystal referenced some of the studies that have come out suggesting that actually around 40% of individuals with dementia, so this is all of the causes of dementia, may be preventable by interventions or by adjustments in behaviors or lifestyle interventions. Some of the exciting work that's going on is actually putting those together. The Alzheimer's Association is leading with partners across the country, the US Pointer trial, which is testing risk reduction strategies in a population of people thought to be at an increased risk to say, what's the impact on our brains? What's the impact on cognition after 2 years? So I'm excited to say that that study is close to enrollment. We're just over 1,800 of the 2,000. It's the largest in its scope and scale in the world that's asking this question. And it's really taking the information from all these different aspects of science and putting them into test in this study.
And as we know, the only way you come up with answers is research like this. Now, you've also got incredible research going on, Dr. Caldwell, at the Women's Alzheimer's Movement Prevention Center. Tell us about that.
I am so excited about the research that we're doing. And really right now, there's 2 different initiatives that we have ongoing. One of those is our research registry. So we're asking patients for permission to use their health data from their clinical visits to see not only if the approach that we're taking is one that women are picking up and using, but then also over time, if what we're recommending is changing health in the way that would suggest we're reducing these women's risk for Alzheimer's disease. So that study is very exciting and getting off the ground as we're now entering into our 3rd year of being open. So that one, we're getting that bulk of data now. The other study that we have going is I have a grant from the National Institute on Aging to look at whether or not the stresses women experience throughout our lives and our loss of estrogen across our menopause transition might actually be meeting and creating in our body and in our brain an environment that is favorable for Alzheimer's disease to start taking place.
Well, loss of estrogen is going to happen. There's nothing we can do about that. But stress, that's something that we do have some power over. Crystal, you're part of this program, of Dr. Caldwell's program. Why did you join the program? And just give us a little bit about it. What did you hope to learn from being part of her research that could actually help you in your life?
Well, first of all, I applaud their research and the work that's being done at our Cleveland Clinic Lubrico Center for Brain Health. Dr. Caldwell and her team are amazing. And I truly do believe, I just personally believe that we will find a cure coming out of the Lubrico Center for Brain Health. Just saying that, put that out there. But, I think initially I did it because I thought it would be just really good for our viewers, first of all, to see what it was like to be a part of a study, because I think that's part of the challenge is getting people who look like me to be involved in studies. And so that would be most beneficial for the research, because then we can get better outcomes if you have a more diverse pool of people from which to study. So I just wanted our viewers to see what that looks like, just maybe to ease some of their concerns or fears about being a part of something like this, being a part of the research. I guess I shouldn't call it a study, research. And so I just kind of saw it as kind of a public service, so to speak. But then I thought, oh, well, hello, this could benefit you too and your family. So I just didn't want that fear always to be kind of looming in the back of my mind, because it's there. I live away from my family, all my family. They're in, different parts of the country, but every time you call a loved one and they're telling you about, how your grandmother or your aunt is declining, and also your loved ones who are serving as caretakers, what that process is like for them, it's kind of in your back of your mind. Okay, is this inevitable? Is this kind of where I'm going to be one day? So what can I do on the front end to try to avoid that particular outcome? And also, I just thought it would be helpful because then I could impart that information to the other family members and let them know what they could do on the prevention side. Because as I learned from Dr. Caldwell in some of our initial visits, and as Dr. Snyder said as well, yes, there is some risk associated with your family genetics, but at the same time, so much of it has to do with certain lifestyle factors. And there were certain circumstances that my family members, had to deal with that maybe I didn't have to deal with health-wise or stress-wise or extenuating circumstances that had more of an impact and made them more predisposed to developing it, as opposed to me ultimately, having that same outcome. So, yeah, I just think, I did it because I wanted our viewers to see what it was like to be involved in something like this and know that it was okay for them to do it. And then also just to help myself and my family.
Absolutely. And now we're to the really exciting part of this, everybody listening. Let's talk about some of the specific foods or supplements or medicines that you might be taking and how that plays. So, Dr. Caldwell, what kind of food might play a role in preventing Alzheimer's? Everyone wants to know, should I be on a vegetarian, a plant-based diet? Do I have to worry about carbs or grains? What can you tell us?
What I can tell you is what we recommend for our women and patients in our clinic is really to go toward a whole food based diet, away from processed foods. So we're not saying that any one particular food is bad or is preventative, but really focusing away from foods that are processed and also away from foods that we know have inflammatory effects on the body, because there's growing research suggesting that those inflammatory effects, if they're sustained over time, might be risk factors for brain inflammation.
And what kind of foods are those that tend to raise inflammation, which we all know is bad for a lot of different things, not just Alzheimer's?
Absolutely. I will mention the top one, which is red meat. So when you hear about plant-based diets and vegetarian diets being less inflammatory, that's one way that that's true. So we do recommend that women stay away from red meat or reduce it in their diet. And so that's the other piece that I would recommend for anybody listening, is really just to think about where you're at, and then think about making some slow changes over time that get you toward a healthier, more whole food-based diet.
And what about that other thing you sometimes have with that red meat dinner, which is the alcohol? Does alcohol affect the brain and put you at more at risk?
It does. So alcohol has now been added to the list of modifiable risks for Alzheimer's disease. And how much is the next question most people ask? And it really is people drinking more than about 7 glasses of wine per week is a risk factor. So in our clinic, we actually recommend that women drink even less than that. And if women don't drink, we don't recommend they start, even though, as many people watching might know, there have been studies on things like resveratrol in red wine as potentially brain beneficial.
All right. I don't think I even have to ask the question about smoking, because we just know so much. But let me ask one about exercise. How much does exercise play in? What do we know about how exercise actually works to help our brain? And therefore, what should we be doing?
We actually know quite a lot about what exercise does for the brain, and it is preventative. That's the bottom line. It is brain healthy, 100%. So one example is that when you exercise, your brain releases a neurochemical called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and that chemical actually supports your memory system. It helps your brain to be more plastic or to be ready to grow new pathways, new neurons, and it protects the neurons or cells that are already there. That effect can be seen right away in a person or an animal who exercises, and it can be sustained over time as well. So just for that, exercise is really critical. But if you go beyond just thinking about what does exercise directly do to our brain, exercise is a major multitasker. It will support your mood. It will reduce stress levels. It will be a routine that really increases the probability that you'll stick with other routines. So exercise is oftentimes my number one recommendation.
And Dr. Snyder, I remember when I first heard this information, and I always had been like, oh man, gotta put the sneakers on and go out there and do my power walk. Then I found out it's gonna help my brain. Oh wait, where are my sneakers? I couldn't get them. I couldn't put them on fast enough. is there any kind of a sense of telling people how much or how often, so that, because women are going to say, okay, I'm in, as I'm hearing this, I'm in, like, how much or what kind should I do?
So I think a lot of the science has pointed to aerobic exercise and really getting your heart rate up and moving. And so, and several times a week over the course of the week and throughout the year. And of course, doing something you're going to continue to do. So not just a couple weeks here and then skip it for a while, like some of us might do. But actually, there was a recent study that came out this past summer at the Alzheimer's Association's International Conference that looked in people that had what we call mild cognitive impairment, so early memory changes. And they evaluated both aerobic exercise and they compared it to people that did strength training. And during this intervention, during this trial, they actually didn't see that either group declined in terms of their memory changes throughout that intervention, suggesting that it's really just that they both did, it's doing something, it's getting moving, getting active, that's beneficial. So we still don't know that exact bit, but moving in that direction.
But that's great, because when, the weather turns bad and you don't want to go outside, you can have little weights, you can do those in the house, you can do resistance training in your house. So that kind of makes it something that you can't have an excuse, right?
Get moving.
Get moving. So get moving is like the one big thing to remember, and eating clean, real food. So then let me ask you about one other question, because it came from one of our audience members, and it was about intermittent fasting. Dr. Caldwell, I mean, this has become a super, trend lately. What are your thoughts on the benefits of intermittent fasting on brain health?
So even before this was a trend, there has been a long research history looking at what fasting or calorie reduction does for brain health. And overall, that story is that regular fasting is helpful for healthy brain aging. So oftentimes we do talk about that technique with women in our clinic, and it's a better alternative many times than things like, listeners probably have heard of the keto diet, which has some similar brain effects, but it often also comes with a lot of drawbacks like the red meat, and some of the same benefits can be had with intermittent fasting. But with that said, not everyone can do intermittent fasting. So people with diabetes, for example, people who might have had an eating disorder history, it's not a great thing to do. So for every woman that I see, you have to really consider your whole medical picture to decide whether or not it's a good option for you.
And as you can imagine, a lot of people asked about supplements. I want to know, I'll have both of you can speak to this. Dr. Caldwell, you can start us off on what your thoughts are about supplements, and are there any that we should be adding to our daily diet?
Supplements is a very popular question in my clinic, and my philosophy and kind of my bottom line is two things. One is, if it's something that you are able to get through your diet, get it through your diet. So rather than going for supplementation, really trying to get your nutrients through what you're eating. And then on the other hand, if you are someone who's not getting enough of particular nutrients that are important for memory, one example would be B vitamins really support memory.
What was that? Which vitamin?
B vitamins.
B, okay.
So, but to know if you need those, you need to have your current levels assessed. So I would recommend that women have their annual checkup with their primary care doctor and find out if they have any deficiencies. And if they do, get those supplemented and then follow them over time. Because even though vitamins seem like something that, you can buy them over the counter, it's could only be good, you can actually have too much of particular vitamins, and you don't want to go there. So talk to your doctor before you start.
And if you have that CBC every year, when you go for that annual checkup religiously, they'll tell you if you have too much or too little. We also see all these advertisements on TV, Dr. Snyder, that say that the supplements will actually improve your cognitive function. Do we have evidence at this point that proves that?
For most, we don't. For most, they have gone through either very small trials and really need to be evaluated in the large and rigorous studies with diverse individuals to understand both if they're beneficial, but also if they're potentially harmful. So always, I think I agree with Dr. Caldwell, have that conversation with your healthcare provider. Now, I will say there was a recent study that was just came out in the last several months called Cosmos Mind. And this study actually looked at a particular supplement along with the multivitamin. And what they found after the intervention is they actually found that individuals with just a multivitamin alone had a benefit on cognition. Now, this needs to be replicated in independent and study with a larger and more diverse population. But it does suggest that, again, get what you can from your diet, but a multivitamin into your daily routine is also something we can all maybe think to do.
That's easy enough, and if it showed results in the study. So we've heard a lot of things, Crystal, and you're part of this. I want to know, how have you changed your diet and your lifestyle?
And it's so funny that you asked. We're heading into the holiday season.
Yeah.
And we're going to try to do our best, to be mindful of all of the back of our minds. For me, I think above all else, it just kind of created this shift in the way I approach just trying to be healthier. I'll be honest, probably prior to this, I just kind of looked at it more so from the perspective of, okay, I want to be able to fit into my clothes. I want to be able to, not see the scale go all the way in this direction. And so I think knowing that there's a bigger picture in all of this, it's kind of shifted the way I think about just my overall wellness and being healthier. So I'm just more cognizant of those choices that I'm making, because it's not just for the here and now. It's not just me being able to just look better. Like, it really can be beneficial for my long-term brain health. Yeah. So I just know there's so much more at stake in all of this right now. So, when I am tempted, to go by the drive-through and I see my favorite little, place that I might be driving by, I'm like, let me exercise. We won't go there, but let me exercise a little more restraint, because there is a larger goal in all of this. And not only with the food side of things, but also I think just the lifestyle side, the stress too, and just finding ways to kind of minimize that as well. But definitely the food can be a challenge, but my goal is not perfection, but incremental progress. That's what I tell myself every day. If I didn't get it right at lunchtime, it's okay. I'm not just going to hang it up for the day. I'm going to try it at dinner,
But it's all the things that we're doing today that are protecting our health and our brain for the future. And several people have talked about how the exercise is also important for so many other reasons. Dr. Caldwell, one of the reasons is to keep our body weight in check. I mean, we know that when it comes to cancer, like breast cancer, all that extra fat that you have on your body, it really is where you store estrogen. So does extra body weight also play into this, protecting our brain?
So obesity is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. And so when someone is in that condition, then that's definitely a time where you want to try to reduce the body weight. And it's really true that they call it visceral fat. So it's the kind of fat that's really the belly fat that is potentially more harmful when it comes to disease states like Alzheimer's disease. But with the women that I work with, my philosophy is, if weight is a goal for you, that is great. Let's put it on the list, but let's not let it be the be all and end all. Just kind of echoing some of the things that Crystal said. I think women especially go through life with so many expectations on what our body should look like that it can become the focus. And it shouldn't be about that when we're talking about prevention. I think we really need to talk about food first, movement first, and then weight as we need to.
But these are all things that we have control over. So that's why we're talking about prevention. A couple of other things. Dr. Snyder, how much do other chronic health conditions, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, how do those things affect our chances of getting Alzheimer's, or do they?
Yeah, well, we do know like what's good for your heart is good for your brain. So also when your heart's not at its best, it's going to impact our brains, right? Our heart's pumping blood through our entire body, including into our brain. And if it's not at its best, if it's not working at its best capacity, it's going to impact the blood going into our brain, which is its food and energy processes. So there is definitely a link between our heart health and our brain health. And you can translate that to prevention, right? So if you're doing things that are good for your heart health, those are going to be good for your brain as well. Metabolic diseases, things like diabetes. Yeah, it's similar to heart disease. We also see a linkage between metabolic disorders and later life risk as well. And so again, it's, know your numbers, have that conversation with your healthcare provider, get them under control, manage them, as that seems to also benefit our later life risk as well. Now, the one that's interesting, Joan, that you asked about was cancer. And in fact, there have been several really large-scale studies of populations that have suggested that the non-smoking cancers, for instance, actually are associated with less risk in later life. And it's unclear why. Some of the biology of the immune system, you might be turning things on in cancer and that you want to be turned off in Alzheimer's or something like that. And so there's still a lot of questions as to why. But what we are seeing is we are seeing some treatments that were developed for cancer treatments being tested in some early stage trials for Alzheimer's today, that kind of idea of repurposing. Same with diabetes, same with heart disease. We're seeing a lot of medications developed for those disorders now being translated and being tested in early stage studies for Alzheimer's, which is exciting. We're leveraging that knowledge to help us go faster.
Absolutely. And there's also, of course, at the beginning of this, we talked about how, your gender can make a difference. So, Crystal, let me take this one to you because I know you're passionate about talking about this one. Race and gender. What have you learned about Black women that has made you so passionate about getting the word out?
Well, knowing that, as a woman, 2/3 of the cases are women, when it comes to Alzheimer's. And as a African-American woman, I'm even twice as more likely to develop it, with those factors. So, I think for me, and that was my whole reason for wanting to be involved in the research, is because I wanted women who look at me to know that it was okay to be involved in something like this, because ultimately this was going to be beneficial for all of us in the long run. I think part of the issue, and I talked to Dr. Caldwell about this, is, and she's talked with me about this, is part of the reason why maybe we may not know the best way to go about treating certain people in certain populations is because we just don't have the research. So I just wanted them to see that it is okay and it's beneficial for all of us in the long run, and kind of changing again the trajectory of our outcomes if we're involved in something like this. Also, there are just some extenuating, circumstances that impact African American women and just people of color more so than other populations. Disparities in access to care, that plays a role. Just being educated on the issues and knowing that you're more predisposed, and then knowing what you can do to put yourself in the best position so that you don't end up developing these brain illnesses. And then also just, like I said, just making yourself aware. And then also a lot of the underlying conditions play a role too. I know in my aunt's case, she had diabetes. I know in my grandmother's case, she had diabetes as well. So just knowing that there are other things that we can do health-wise that could make us less predisposed to ultimately developing these brain illnesses. And it not only affects, obviously, the person who's going through this trial, but it has an impact on the family. And it's hard. It's very difficult to see your loved one declining. Being emotional.
Yeah. That's okay. I know that you've been going through this, and I know people who have loved ones, and they've talked about how tough it is to watch them kind of, how has it been described, just kind of fade away or lose touch with reality. And that's so hard on the caretaker as well.
It is. Yeah, and you see that firsthand. My aunt in my grandmother's case, she's a nurse, so that was so helpful, that we had some medical professionals in the family, and she pretty much just put her life on hold so that she could be the primary caretaker for my grandmother. In addition to, we needed some additional help as her illness progressed. But yeah, and then in terms of supporting those caretakers, a lot of times what we would do is we would go visit and give her a few hours off or give her the weekend off so that all were on deck to help with my grandmother, because she just got to the point where just certain basic tasks she could not fulfill on a day-to-day basis. So it definitely takes a toll on the entire family. So I just think it's not just you making sure you don't find yourself in that position, but knowing the toll that it takes on the family emotionally, mentally, physically for Matt, because, she kind of had to lift my grandmother and kind of adjust her sometimes. So I know that had an impact on her physical health, because now she's had to have some surgery, like on her knees and things of that nature. So I just wanted them to know that they're not alone in this, and that there are resources and there is help available. And if I can be that person to show them, what it looks like, to get more education on it, to do the research so that we can have more information as to how we can treat this and the way it needs to be treated, and ultimately move toward a cure that would be beneficial for all of us, regardless of gender, regardless of race, regardless of socioeconomic class, then I think we're all better for it.
Dr. Caldwell, as I listen to Crystal, I think, oh my gosh, this has got to put so much stress on the caregivers. And we're really learning a lot of new research about how stress affects cardiac health. There's been some really unbelievable recent research. And so talk a little bit about the stress, the impact of stress on brain health, because the last 3 years have not boded too well on the stress front for everyone and for the young population.
Yes. So stress is such an issue in the age group of women that I work with. So when you're between 30 and 60, it doesn't matter what life path you've chosen. Most women will have one or more of these stressors going on. They are moving up in their career. They have small children. And in addition to taking care of those children, they also have a parent or a grandparent with Alzheimer's disease, and they may be providing that direct care in that way. So there is just a massive amount of stress at this age. And then in talking with women, oftentimes they tell me, it's not really fair to ask about stress right now during a pandemic, but at the same time, it's not a normal level of stress for any of us. And it impacts some women a lot more than others. We know from decades of neuroscience research that chronic stress, the kind of stress that doesn't let up and the kind of stress that you don't know when it ever will, that is the kind that is worst for brain health. Your body winds up having kind of a low grade fight or flight response that really just kind of runs. And we do know that women actually shut that off a little less well than men do. So we're a little bit more prone to the effects of that chronic stress. And unfortunately, one of the ways that chronic stress winds up changing us potentially is in our memory systems, just based on the targets of those stress hormones that are released. So even if stress is chronic, one of the things that women can do is break it up. If you can, that neurochemical cycle. We can't, remove a pandemic. Sometimes we can't remove caregiving stress or work stress, but you can break that cycle in your body by doing things like exercising.
Exercising is probably the most important thing, but even like taking time out, and don't be guilty for taking time out to read a book or to learn to meditate a little or whatever it is you're going to do. Dr. Snyder, we were asked by some people, what about being exposed to things, general anesthesia? That was a question that was repeated a lot of times. Even aluminum. Do we know about this?
So the data on aluminum, we do find that in the brains of individuals after they've passed that had Alzheimer's, we do see levels of aluminum. We also see it in people that didn't have Alzheimer's. In terms of looking at it as a risk, that data hasn't really panned out as being linked to a long-term risk or a risk factor. But there is increasing data that's looking at populations around air pollution, for instance, that sees an association when there's higher levels of small particle air pollution, that seems to be linked to increased risk. And in fact, one study that came from the University of Southern California that was funded in partnership between WHAM and the Alzheimer's Association actually showed that when they reduced or there were policies that changed air pollution, that they actually saw that impacted risk as well. So that idea that that's something that maybe as we think about policies and as we think about other ways that we can impact kind of population-based risk. The other thing that you asked about, Joan, what was the other thing? I'm now blanking because I went into air pollution. You asked about aluminum and
being put under anesthesia.
There's been some research that has suggested that may uncover some of the underlying biology. There is something called post-cognitive syndrome that some individuals experience following anesthesia for short periods of time. Sometimes it reverses, sometimes it doesn't. Some individuals, it may be that they actually have the underlying brain changes already associated with Alzheimer's or something else. There may be something else going on. There's still a lot of questions around this. And that's really why it's such an important conversation to have with your doctor around what might be the benefits and risks of any surgery, any medication, any intervention across.
That was going to be my next question to you. What about medications? Are certain medications the kind that if you can help it to stay away from? Like sleeping pills, etc.
That's why there have been some studies that have looked at sleeping pills that have kind of those black box warnings. And certainly that's a conversation to have with your healthcare provider. But now I balance that with this idea of sleep being so important for our brains as well, right? So all the stuff that Dr. Caldwell and Crystal were talking about and in ensuring that you're breaking that stress pattern, that you're thinking about exercise, meditation, that you're taking that time for yourself. That's also important to also getting a good night's sleep. And making sure that you're getting a good night's sleep is really important for the underlying biology of your brain and helping your brain to take out its trash, if you will, as well.
That's right. But it'll help people understand that because if you understand what happens when you are asleep, well, first of all, let's go back. When you exercise, all that blood and oxygen and nutrients go up there and new little neurons are formed. But there's a byproduct. I forget the name of it. There's a byproduct.
Nitric oxide?
Yeah, well, there's a byproduct. And when you're sleeping, it's almost like the car wash goes in there. I use that analogy in my latest book and like sweeps it all out and cleans it all out. And if you don't get good sleep, that washing out isn't happening. And it can sometimes, I guess, even leave you like waking up a little bit like in what's known as brain fog.
Yeah. So if you're not taking out your trash and you're letting it pile up over time, or even if maybe you're taking out one can, but not the other, you might see slow pile up over many, many years. And that could contribute to making your brain more vulnerable to the changes that we see in Alzheimer's or some of these other causes of dementia as well. And so all of that is really important as we think about what can we do to protect our brain over the long term?
So 7 to 9 hours, is that pretty much the general recommendation?
The sweet spot that studies have suggested is 7 hours plus or minus 2, right? So there's been a few large studies that have looked at that and have shown, particularly in women, that 7 hours plus or minus 2 hours is the sweet spot.
Dr. Caldwell, women's health has long been under-researched, we all know. In fact, I don't think it was until 2004 that the NIH actually demanded that gender be considered as part of medical studies that they are funding. So WHAM is a leader in funding women-based Alzheimer's and brain health research in particular, like yours. So talk to us a little bit about the importance, why it's so important to study women's health separately from men's health.
I'm really glad you asked that. It is so critical that we catch up. So for many, many years, whether we're talking about a study of humans or a study of mice, when it came to Alzheimer's disease, or even things that impact other diseases that impact women more like MS, oftentimes who got included in the study was men and male animals.
Yeah.
So we have a whole lot of information about how many of the interventions, how many of the drugs work in men. And we have less of that information about how things play out in women. And oftentimes there's a difference where even if you included women in your study, when you pooled everybody together, you got one answer. But if you were to have separated out the women from the men, it actually might have looked all the same together because women were above and men were below and they got averaged together. So at this point, we really critically need large scale studies that include what they call sex stratification, or separating out men and women so that you can look at your effects in both sexes separately as well as all together. And I'll say too that this phase of research when it comes to women, and particularly in Alzheimer's disease, thanks to the advocacy and the research funding of groups like WHAM and the Alzheimer's Association, it's changing a lot. But where we still are missing the picture in many studies is when it comes to the issues of race and ethnicity. So the same issue that I said was happening for women, decades ago, we're there right now when it comes to race and ethnicity. We really have to do better on that front in order to better understand who might benefit most from treatments or who might be at risk and why.
I remember reading some research about this, saying that one of the standardized tests that is given is they give you these 10 words. I've actually gone through this test. They give you these 10 words, and then you're supposed to remember them, and then they give you like a million other tests. And then, 20, 30 minutes later, they ask you for the 10 words, and that women are list makers. So we have this skill down pretty pat because we remember our to-do list. So we would do much better on that than men. And consequently, women wouldn't be diagnosed until many, many years later. And it's because the test is wrong. Do I remember reading that right?
You do. And my lab has actually done some of that work. We showed in about more than 1,000 patients in our neuropsych clinic where people come to get their memory tested. Mm-hmm. If you looked across that verbal memory test where you have to learn a list, women outperform men. And that's not true for other types of memory tests, like if you have to learn figures. And unfortunately, the women who really outperformed men were those aged 70 to 80. And that is right around the time where many people are first experiencing symptoms of Alzheimer's. And, there are many things that could go into why women do have that better verbal memory. But it's a risk when it comes to getting diagnosed for women. And it might play into the fact that women have greater rates of Alzheimer's. Men have greater rates of mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's disease. And it might just be that men are getting picked up for that earlier diagnosis better, and more women are getting picked up when they have dementia.
So let me ask the question that I'm sure everybody at home is wanting me to ask. You talk about that 70 to 80 being the time when you really need to know. So when you're, the name of my book is Why Did I Come Into This Room? And I named it that for a reason, because everybody, even young people, say, oh my God, I've said that so many times. I walk downstairs, I go into the kitchen, I'm like, what did I want to do? Tell us, does that kind of forgetfulness, not remembering a person's name, necessarily indicate that you are going to have dementia?
Absolutely not. So especially that one, why did I come into this room? It is the number one complaint with normal, healthy aging. And you're right, it can happen at any age as well. Forgetting can happen to any of us. When you're wondering, is this something I should be worried about? There's two things I suggest people watch out for. One is, how often is it happening? For example, if you're forgetting names every time you see a person, that could be a sign that that's significant. And the other one is, how bad is it? The thing that you forgot, how significant is it? For example, if you forgot where your car keys were, That could happen to any of us.
Yeah.
If you forgot what your car keys were, that would be a major sign of something going wrong.
All right. We only have a few minutes left, but I have to ask you, Dr. Snyder, can you tell us a little, I think I'm going to pronounce this right, lecanemab?
Lecanemab. So it's one of the late stage trials that just reported out. They reported out their top line results. So many of us likely saw those headlines, and we're really looking forward to the deeper dive of the data in just a couple of weeks at a meeting called Clinical Trials in Alzheimer's. Now, it's one of 4 drugs that is in late stage development, or one that has been approved that's targeting the beta amyloid. So one of the hallmark brain changes that we see in Alzheimer's disease specifically, and they all are targeting different aspects or different areas or forms of the beta amyloid. So
And are those those things up in the brain that
plaques? One of the plaques. It's one of the hallmark brain changes. Yes.
And so that's what is targeting, that plaque that you don't find in dementia, right? You find it in Alzheimer's?
You find it specific in Alzheimer's.
What's the first step someone should take if they or someone they love hear those words? Your diagnosis is Alzheimer's.
I would say reach out to your local resources, connect with the Alzheimer's Association, the Area on Aging, find resources that are going to support your family throughout your journey. Make sure that you have a healthcare provider like Dr. Caldwell or others that are going to listen to you through your journey and be both for the individual that's living with the disease as well as for the caregiver. There are resources like education about what's going to be the progression, thinking about financial care planning, find clinical trials. I really applaud you, Crystal, for your just incredible advocacy of raising your hand, raising your voice, but participating in research to change the future. We can all do that. We can all be part of that solution.
And you talk about the caregiver. We can't forget the caregiver, and usually it's a woman. Crystal, what do you say? What can we do to support caregivers?
You know, a lot of times it's just the small things you can do. You know, I know, like I was mentioning with my aunt, a lot of times we would just go down there and just give her a few hours to herself, because a lot of times they don't get that time for themselves, because they're spending so much of their time and energy they're pouring into someone else, your loved one. So just some of the small things, you know, even if you just call them and check on them too, and seeing how they're doing emotionally and mentally, because it's very trying for them to see up close and personal your loved one declining like that, because they're seeing it day in and day out. I mean, we're kind of dipping in and dipping out when we can help, but this is just a part of their everyday reality now, and it's very trying on them. So, and then if you could do your part, like Dr. Snyder was saying, reaching out to those local resources, and then just passing along to them and letting them know what's available, because maybe they're so consumed with caring for and being there for your loved one, they don't have that time to be able to know what else is out there to support them. So, and a lot of times we as women, we are the ones who find ourselves in that role. So let's do what we can as women to support other women who find themselves in that position.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Caldwell, Dr. Snyder. Thank you so much. And Crystal, thank you for being here today with us. And thank you to Prevention and Healthy Women and the Women's Alzheimer's Movement at Cleveland Clinic for sponsoring today's event. And by the way, thank you. Thank all of you who've been watching this You and Your Brain seminar for really inspiring today's conversation. Thanks, everyone.